Why did the Romans think that the Germanic god Odin was the same as their own Mercury? Tacitus said of the Germans that they worshipped Mercury above all, and he was referring to Odin. Even Julius Caesar said that the Gauls worshipped Mercury above all. And European calendars to this day preserve the same interpretation. The Latin Dies Mercurii, or the Day of Mercury, versus Woden's Day in German, or Wednesday in English. One might dismiss this as merely another Roman conflation, but upon deeper inspection, there may be a real basis for the mythological evolution of Odin, Mercury, Hermes, and a few other similar gods from an older common ancestor. As usual, I prepared a map to help us investigate. So, for starters, let's lay out the different characteristics of Mercury Hermes. So Mercury is a traveler or wanderer of roads. He's a merchant. He's a thief or trickster, sometimes thieving cattle, like from Apollo, for instance. He's a wizard or a magician or orator, oracle, and wizard in this case also means like a god of wisdom. A herdsman, a shepherd, and a psychopomp, which is a farrier of the dead into the afterlife by some means. Now, already if we look at the characteristics of Odin, Odin is indeed a traveler or wanderer. He is not necessarily a merchant or wealthy. I would say no. He does have a ring of kind of infinite wealth that can replicate itself, but it's not exactly a merchant deity per se. He is at times a thief and a trickster. He thieves the mead of poetry, for instance, and transforms into different animals and things. He's the quintessential definition of a wizard or a magician. He is effectively a herdsman because during the wild hunt, although he's hunting spirits, he is effectively also herding those spirits into the West, into the underworld afterlife. It's part of his duty as indeed also a psychopomp, also selects valiant souls to join him in Valhalla. I've also added here a shapeshifter, since Odin indeed shapeshifts a lot. Hermes, Mercury, on the other hand, doesn't actually shapeshift into animals, beasts, or necessarily even other personalities very often. He kind of just shifts between whether he wants to pretend to be immortal or not really. But Odin introduced that idea, which has some relationship with being a trickster, but is a little different. I thought that would be an important one to look at because that will come up with a few other entities. So we already have almost every aspect that I've listed here being similar to Odin. So at least from a functionalist standpoint, Odin and Hermes are quite similar. But we can go even deeper and look at the web that is hypothetical reconstruction. So when a deity is reconstructed, what that really means is that we don't know what the name of the original deity, if there even was one. We don't know their actual name or exact functions in a older ancestral culture or language that might have split up into different languages and different religions over time. Linguists use a complicated process of kind of looking at all these different cognates, all these different words in different languages, and hypothesizing what older word might have split into those words, essentially. So when you can do that when you're studying the evolution of languages in general, and you can do that when you're studying mythology specifically. You see these dashed lines and these asterisks, they mean that it's reconstructed. It's hypothetical, so not proven. The solid lines are proven. Like, we know that the German Odin made landfall in England, and well, at that time it would have been just Britain or Brittany, and it was conquered by the Anglo-Saxons. With Odin, we have a few different forms. You know, there's the German forms, and there's many different other German groups that have Odin in their pantheon, but the most popular one is, of course, Norse up here. And so both this German Woden and this Norse Odin are reconstructed as Wodenas, and the meaning of the name with Mad One or Mad One is presumably mad or spirited one. And madness in this sense was kind of a cognate to spirited or energetic, passionate, that all those kinds of ideas were wrapped up in that word. That is the basis of the god Odin. Of course, we have Wodaz, which is kind of madness and spirit itself. We do see this specific Wodaz in a deity nonetheless called Oder, who is supposedly the husband of Freya, but Freya is off mourning his absence because he's gone. And it's odd because his linguistic obviously relates to Odin, and yet Odin is there in Norse, yet Odin also is a wanderer. He's often gone, so I tend to treat just Oder and Odin as potentially the same being that split or was named separately in this source for some reason. Odin being a partner of Freya makes sense if you consider that Freya and Frigga might have been different forms of the same underlying goddess, like essentially a difference between dawn and dusk, the maiden and the elder. Nonetheless, there's another deity in Norse actually that comes up with this Oder ending, and in the context of that word, his name Hermodir means army mood, army fury. It's essentially like the energy, the zeitgeist of the army of war itself. And Hermodir is depicted on horseback, Sleipnir, Odin's horse, essentially being a psychopomp, herding the dead. Like I said earlier, Hermodir is considered to be the son of Odin, but his entire caricature is quite redundant. Then when you go further back into Indo-European, Proto-Indo-European reconstruction, the Austrian philologist Julius Pokerny reconstructed Wehat as the Proto-Indo-European form of this word that means Woden, madness, spirit. Also in Celtic, there's Watis. That comes up a few times, and even in Latin, in Italy, there's Vates. And in Irish, there's Watis coming up again. And in every case, that's like a seer or a prophet that is specifically seeing a kind of madness, right? So it's the same overlapping idea. In German, coincidentally, you do have a female form of that kind of seer called the vulvas. So yes, we have these two lines of Indo-European, Proto-Germanic, and Proto-Italo-Celtic going off this way from this hypothetical madness. It's not a reconstructed deity, it's a reconstructed word. Next, you remember how I said that Julius Caesar said that the Gauls worshipped Mercury above all. So it's very similar to how Tacitus talked about the Germans worshipping Mercury. There are many different Gaulish local deities that were said to be a form of Mercury. A few of them were kind of more wild men or herdsmen, which is, again, kind of a Mercurian aspect, like we said in this list. But I'm leaving them a little out because then it starts to get really complicated. The Latin names for Gallo-Roman deities in these Gaulish territories that were said to have been in some way an indigenous deity. So we have Visucius, whose name means wise, vis, wise, but also is related to the word for raven. Ravens were considered wise. Sisonius means charioteer, and the form was, interestingly, the giver, associating him perhaps with some of those wealthy attributes. I have these lines, these dotted lines are like very speculative, and these are more so influence or even trading of influence. So I have this arrow, for instance, going both ways because I'm not sure. Like maybe the Germanic Odin interfacing with the Celtic forms created some mixed form here that resembled each other. I don't know. And then obviously all these arrows are being applied from Mercury when the Romans conquered Gaul and they applied Mercury to all these names or all these original forms that we don't quite know, and they're kind of already a merger. So yes, I mean, it could be interesting, I think, to look at this again and to add a new field. Is he a traveler? Well, he's a charioteer, so I would say yes. Is he a merchant? This giver connotation might actually be indicating something of wealth or being a merchant. Is he a thief or trickster? I don't know if we can say that with too much confidence. Shapeshifter, also unknown. Wizard magician, it is a wise god and has a lot in common. I would say yes. Herdsman, if we're including other forms of Mercury in Gaul, there is Arvernus and these like bear hide wearing sort of wild man that are called forms of Hermes. I would say yes, there's at least an understanding by the Gauls and the Gallo-Romans that there was some relationship of him to herds and that kind of wild animal stuff. Psychopomp, can't say with any certainty with any of these particular forms, but definitely not outside the realm of possibility. And again, we see that's a pretty interesting list there. So could the Gauls and Celts more broadly have a form of Odin? I would say most likely they probably did have some form. For the sake of this video, I neglected to mention a very particular form that I think is probably true. There is a psychopomp in Irish and a lot of other Britannic Celtic religion, and that is Finn, and his name actually means blessed or white, bright, all those sorts of ideas. And there is a Gaulish form, a form which means the same thing, but that whole thing has quite a few more tendrils around, and we can look into at another time. But nonetheless, yes, there probably was a Celtic psychopomp, Hermes, Odin-like figure. Next, let's move a bit closer to the steppe, or the Proto-Indo-European origins area, to talk about the Balto-Slavic form of Odin, Mercury, effectively. Now, this is moving away from any places that were directly conquered by the Romans, so we're dealing with something that would resemble a lot more this set of aspects before any kind of Mercury or Hermes influence might have changed it. So the two main characters I'll be talking about are Velnias, which is the Lithuanian name in Baltic cultures, Baltic mythology, Baltic language family, and then there's Veles, which is the Slavic. So that's all Slavic languages and groups. They are cognate with one another, and they are effectively the same deity. It's Veles here, which means veil. Then same with Velnias in Lithuanian, Velinas in Latvian. All of them mean veil, and that's like the cover, the wool or cloth covering of one's eyes. And this also has a relationship to the name for a valley, because a valley is enclosed, it's encircled by mountains, and there was this really old, it seems, Proto-Indo-European term that has to do with a valley or a veil or wool, like wrapping something, surrounding something, encircling something. A while ago, Russian linguists actually reconstructed this Proto-Indo-European Welunos or Velnos from these two main sources of Velnias and Veles. So I also wanted to mention I have a dotted gray line here that's hard to see. Those are like my speculations that are really quite speculative, but I find them interesting because there is a term that was reconstructed by the Croatian linguist Ranko Matosovic, and that is Weleti, which would mean a seer or revealer. Well is like veal, reveal. It has to do with sight, and there is potentially Proto-Celtic form of that. He found it in Philly, a seer or vealer type of prophet in Irish. And it's very interesting because a seer is this same term as what we mentioned before, the Watis. In all these sources, Watis is, and Vatis is a seer through madness, through the spirited, gave them, divine inspiration effectively. These two words have different roots, and yet they both point to overlapping meaning, similar roles, and just so happen to go back to a deity that I'm about to argue very much resembles Odin, who would have the same linguistic of this other kind of seer. So it's very interesting to see that. There's certainly a metaphorical relationship between the veil and sight. I mentioned the vulvas as well, and the linguistic between vulva has to do with kind of changing or revolving, going around in a circle. And again, circle and encircled, and the surrounding, the valley, the veil, the cloth, the wool, it all actually kind of has a metaphorical meaning to it. And then lastly, there's another kind of lost word for this same deity in Prussian. Prussian is kind of it's a dead language. The Prussians, that is Germans, wiped it out and converted them to Christianity and demonized a lot of their gods. Maybe sometime in this process or beforehand, this deity of the underworld and of death was called Pekels. And that linguistic is not related to the Vel. It means essentially wicked or mad or angry. So it's that different kind of madness. And I have another one of my little gray lines here. Was a revelation to me that if you take the Proto-Indo-European reconstructed word of Wehat and Wehat, if you were to follow a general linguistic rule where sometimes K devolves into H, sometimes a hard sound becomes a soft sound over time. If you were to look at a really old form of Wehat, there's a possibility, speculatively, that it could have had a K sound. It could have been Wehat, as either, this evil, demonized form, or like actual madness or anger or the spirited sort of passionate energy, right? So that's my speculation. Getting to these particular personalities, let's start with the Lithuanian Velnias. Is he a traveler? Yes, so he has a black horse that he rides across the sky and wanders across the sky from day to day into the dusk again in the evening. So, yes, he is a traveler. Was he a merchant or wealthy? Yes, he is not necessarily a merchant, but he is associated with wealth, in particular cattle wealth, and this cattle is in the underworld, and that is the land that he rules. And there's this general motif, even the Romans have it, of a dispater, a dark father of the underworld, that, like Pluto's name actually means plenty, a plentiful. It means wealth of the earth, like minerals, or that place which all plants grow out of the soil from, right? So there's a heavy connotation of this deity with wealth, actually. Are they a thief or a trickster? Yes. So at the dawn of creation, Velnias and Perkunas, the thunder goddess Perkunas, are brothers, and they're constantly fighting. Velnias is constantly creating things. He's like a demiurge, creating a lot of the world. And Perkunas is always trying to enact order on the kind of chaos that his brother Velnias is creating. So there's definitely a trickster aspect there, but he always gets away with it. He transforms into different animals and objects to escape persecution of his brother. So he's also a shapeshifter. Is he a wizard or magician? I mean, by definition, does he necessarily have to do with being particularly wise, particularly magical? As a demiurge, he creates things, he invents things. I would say maybe, honestly, with this one, maybe. It's a little different. Is he a herdsman? Okay, so similar to what we talked about before, when Velnias is going across the sky every day, he's actually herding spirits of the dead every night. So that is his job. And again, we have that cattle idea that is implied here of him being possibly a cowherd. People and spirits and souls and ghosts are treated as a kind of cattle that he is a shepherd of. And psychopomp, again, kind of carries along with herdsmen. These two work together. A few of these different things kind of work together in an interesting way. So for Lithuanian Velnias, pretty clear. For the Slavic Veles, is he a traveler or a wanderer? Yes, he's kind of depicted as an old man at times, traveling the wilderness, surrounded by animals. I would say he's kind of a wild man traveler type. Is he associated with wealth of like the underworld and everything? Yes, he is also still Lord of the Underworld, and he has kind of a cowherd nature to him. He is associated explicitly with cattle. And even in later Slavic sources, he starts to get twisted into basically a European dragon, where Veles is demonized, and it becomes another name for the devil. And he steals cattle as a dragon and devours them. So it's that kind of idea going on. Again, it makes sense that a lot of Christianized cultures took their chthonic underworld deities that might not have been evil, probably had a purpose, and demonized them, made them seem like bad deities. Like death becomes negative rather than accepted as a normal part of life. Is he a thief or a trickster? Yes, he also has a relationship with Perun, who is cognate with Perkunas in Slavic now, where they are fighting, especially every year during the winter solstice, for supremacy. Basically, Veles takes the form of a serpent and ascends the world tree and goes to the canopy and fights Perun on the top, and Perun's always victorious, and Veles is prevented from taking over. Veles also shapeshifts into various things, into an elder man, or a bear, a bull, a wolf, or a serpent, so all kinds of things. Is he wizard or magician? So this one's a little stronger. Like, he actually has a reputation of being a wizard or magician. That is how the Slavs tended to talk about him. Right? A wandering magician. Is he herdsman? Yes, he's a shepherd of the dead in much the same way that Velnias is, and that is of the dead as well as animals in general, so that is a psychopomp too. So, I mean, Veles is one that is actually clear all the way down. Like, he is very strongly all of these things. And that's an interesting perspective, because when you look at where Veles is in Slavic relative to the homeland of the Proto-Indo-Europeans, he is closest to where they originally would have been from. There is an epithet of Odin, the slain or valiant slain, the father of the slain, father of the valiant, right? Because obviously Odin takes the dead into Valhalla. The slain and the dead are wrapped up in wool. They are veiled. And then the other kind of connection, we have a line going down here. We haven't gone over to the Indo-Aryan sort of region yet, but Vala is cognate with this same valley cave word. And if you're familiar with Tolkien, you know that sometimes he used the term like Morgul Vale, and these old English style sayings. A vale is a valley. Again, that enclosure, the idea of an enclosure, is part of what it means to veil one's eyes with wool, and wool itself. But Vala in the Vedic sources is later personified as kind of a stone serpent, but originally he's just actually the name for an area, a cave, or a valley that has cattle that were stolen. So if you have been listening to everything I've been talking about, this Welunos character, we can see that there's an overlapping of motifs, even if the characters and whatnot aren't always the same thing, and sometimes they're animate or inanimate objects. In this case, Vala later becomes kind of a stealer of cattle, so very much like what Veles later became, but early on kind of represented a place where the cattle are kept. And the interesting thing about that is Valhalla in Norse is a place where the spirits of the dead are kept. And one might think of that place and those people, those warriors, those valiant slain, as being a kind of cattle. So the final reconstructed form we'll be talking about is Pehuson, which was reconstructed originally by the German linguist Hermann Kollitz from Pushan and Pan. Pushan is a deity in Vedic, and Pan, everyone knows, is the wild man of Greek and also Faunus in Roman mythology. So in this case, Faunus in Roman or Latin does not actually stem from the same word, even though faun and pan are not very far away linguistically, it sounds. Faunus means favor in Latin, so wild favor when traveling through the wilderness, and growing of wild flocks for the hunt. Pehuson means pastor or protector. Pasture is like a field, a valley that sheep or cattle of various kinds are living in, and then they have a protector, a pastor, a shepherd, or a cowherd, or a goat herd, whatever kind of animal it is. The kind of folk etymology is that Pan means all, but that was actually a later interpretation of kind of philosophical thinking in Greek culture. An older Doric Greek name for him, Peon, actually means pastor and herdsman, so that's what a lot of these reconstructive scholars think might be going on there. And these days, Pan is kind of treated as just kind of a wild being running around, kind of being chaotic. But originally, probably in his oldest worshipped forms, he was a herder of not just wild animals, but also of many types of cattle. A lot of these aspects of Pan overlap with some aspects of Hermes. In some Greek sources, Hermes is actually the father of Pan, with Dryope, the dryad of oak and poplar trees. And that might seem really strange to kind of put Pan and Hermes together like that, and at this point I would agree that I color them differently. I think that Pan has become quite distinct from Hermes. And so I give this color, this lighter teal color is a messenger archetype or a psychopomp archetype, whereas this green one is more of a wild earth god type, nature god type color. But it's quite clear and evident that there was some link between them in old times. And one interesting example is Pushan over here is himself a psychopomp, ferrying dead souls again, just like Hermes does, and yet he has a chariot that's pulled by goats. So that being said, let's go look and compare these to everything else. Pushan in Vedic is, yes, a wanderer and a charioteer. Pan, also by nature of being a wild man, is indeed a traveler and wanderer as well. Is Pushan a merchant or wealthy in some way? I would definitely say yes. So he's a protector of travelers, tasked with protecting against thieves who want to steal cattle and also returning the cattle when they are stolen. He's extremely benevolent, even more so than some of these other deities are treated. And again, he's particularly tied to cows. Pan, meanwhile, at least in the oldest kind of forms of him, is a protector of flocks and herds, represents kind of the multiplication and abundance of those herds. Even his another one of his Roman epithets of Faunus is Enus, which means like multiplier, and that means like reproduction, the kind of abundance that comes with being pastoral. So a pastoral abundance is very much, as we've seen with Velnias being a cowherd as well, and it's very much a sign of wealth in that particular cultural context. Is Pushan a thief or a trickster? Quite the opposite. He's actually a protector against thieves and tricksters and trickery, essentially. He's very straight edge. Pan, on the other hand, is very much a trickster, and I don't know if I need to say anything more about that. Shape-shifting, Pushan also does not shape-shift in any real way. Pan, it's a little more complicated. He shapeshifts in one story, where his lower half becomes a fish in order to escape Typhon, but in that Typhon flight to Egypt story, all of the gods transform in some way into animal. And Pan himself mostly is just what he is. He's just a goat man. So I would say actually no for shape-shifting in general, but for the sake of some people saying, all he did once, like, well, maybe then. At least maybe in the sense of if he descended from one that did shape-shift, it's not outside the realm of possibility. Being a magician or wizard, I would say Pushan, not necessarily a very strong case in that. He doesn't have this Maya type energy going on. Pan, wild magic one might say, but it's not quite magic, it's just wild energy. One could see, and especially this happened later, that Pan has a sort of madness. It's almost Dionysian, very similar to the form of magic that Odin exhibits. I would say, I would say maybe there is a kind of magic. It's a wild, frenzied kind of magic, right? Herdsmen, yeah, clearly both are herdsmen by literally definition. And psychopomp. So Pushan is definitely a psychopomp. He actually ferries souls, so he is very much a protector of cattle and souls as cattle. Whereas Pan, he kind of represents a bridge between the spirit world and the wild world and our world, but he's not specifically tasked as a psychopomp necessarily. So I would say maybe on this one again. So even everything here with the Pan, like the things that are uncertain are still maybe. Again, just because I say all these things are in common and that maybe all these deities were descended from some common deity in the steppe, some pastoral god, that doesn't mean that today we have to see all of them as the same. Like, that's not necessarily what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to show patterns, and we can think for ourselves and decide for ourselves how, in current pagan practice, we want to see things. So this is at least an option to see things this way. So in conclusion, hopefully you can see correlations between these different deities that are probably not entirely coincidence in every case. And there is a story or a hypothesis to explain how they could have spread into all these different contexts. Of course, just because these names might be descended from a Proto-Indo-European language, and that people might have brought that term into these regions. Each of these regions had people living there beforehand that might have had, and most likely had, deities that were pastoral. They might not have been quite as pastoral as the steppe herders were, but nonetheless, the Neolithic peoples of Europe, for instance, had goats and cows and sheep long before the Indo-Europeans got there. So if they would have a deity that protected those flocks, that would make sense. They might have had a separate name for it. For instance, you have Cadmus, that they, in Greek sources, he's considered to be a Phoenician, and he brought the Phoenician alphabet to the Greeks. But when you look at his pattern showing up in a few different places, like with you kind of get an indication that maybe Cadmus was older than the Phoenicians. Maybe they said Phoenician because that was how they described a very archaic Levantine or Anatolian source of their culture or language. Cadmus, very much like Pushan, sets off to retrieve his sister, Europa, after she's abducted by Zeus. And Zeus takes the form of a bull, and Europa sometimes herself is associated with a cow. One might even think of that motif as being potentially Neolithic in origin. Might have reached the Indo-European steppe through perhaps the Caucasian farmers who make up 50% of Proto-Indo-European ancestry. It's more complicated than even this complicated web that I made for you makes it seem, right? I'm trying to make it as clear as I could. If you have any questions, any other hypotheses, other connections, even critiques, I'll take them on board and I can respond to your comments. Remember, if you want to see more of this sort of stuff, to leave a like and subscribe for future videos. I also sell charts of various different pantheons. I recently made a chart of Proto-Indo-European hypothetical pantheon. You can see in here there's Pehuson, pastor, shepherd down here. So you can have this cheat sheet for yourself by following any link in our description. We have a few different shops We've got Etsy, we've got our own website, we've got Gumroad, a lot of easy ways for you to get some of these things, and also a lot of other charts that we have in various different combo deals. Please support us if you like this kind of thing. It helps a lot to have something like this that we can actually give to you instead of just relying on the algorithm, right?